My mother was 76 years old when she was finally diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and I was 40. And to speed up between the age of 20 when I started college and turning 40, I earned 2 master's degrees, I got married, had 2 children, divorced, had to move back home with my mom and dad, with my children, oh my God forbid, for about a year and a half. And then I started a new career and began life as a single parent in my 30s. And it was during the late 30s that my mother was starting to exhibit signs of dementia. And we were telling my mom, you need an evaluation, you're forgetting things. And it seemed like once I had moved out of the house, my mom and our relationship did seem to improve. It was like living out of her roof. When I would come home to visit, it was a lot better. But everyone was calling the sisters saying, your mom's really getting forgetful, and she was picking people up on the street because she was getting lost on the way home, and she was mailing bills, and the bills would get sent back to the house because she wasn't filling out the checks correctly. But her doctor could not convince her to get evaluated. And if we even dared tell my mother that we thought something was wrong, she'd cuss you out and throw something at you. And I remember one time I looked at her thyroid medicine bottle and I said, "Mom, you're taking your meds wrong." And she threw the bottle and said, "You don't tell me what to do, and I know what I'm doing." So it was almost easier to let my mom go off than it was to suggest treatment, because she just refused, to even see that she had a problem. So her doctors were like, if you guys don't intervene, someone's going to get hurt. And her doctor even tried to set it up where we could take my mom to an emergency room, but everybody was too afraid of my mom to really do it. So things came to a head because my mom had always been very aggressive and violent, and I think with the onset of the dementia, it perpetuated her violence even that much more. So we had all moved out, and my poor dad was stuck to deal with my mom, and he would call us up saying, "She's chasing me around the house with a stick, and every time she misplaces her purse, she's calling the police saying I'm stealing from her." And he was just at his wit's end. So it was one day in July of 2007, and my sisters and I were out, and it's very rare that 3 of us would be doing anything together, but we were out having lunch, and at the same time all of our cell phones were going off. I was getting a text, my sister was getting a text, phone calls, and it was neighbors in my mom's neighborhood calling to say that we needed to get to our parents' home because something was going down. So my mother, who was the compulsive lock lady, who had jars of keys and locks on every door and, everything like a fortress, she was home alone, and she was in her bedroom. And there were 2 doors to her bedroom, one to the bathroom and one to the hallway. Both doors had double locks and a latch. And I guess with the dementia, she got confused and she couldn't figure out how to get out of her room door. And my dad wasn't home, and she called 911 and told the police that my father had her held hostage, and he wasn't even there. So the Inglewood Police Department shows up with their guns drawn surrounding the house, telling some phantom person, "Come out with your hands up." And when they finally realized that no one was there and my mother was screaming for help, they knocked on her window and they said, "Give us the keys." And they were able to talk my mom into passing the keys through the window, and they were able to get in. And then they realized my mom was home alone. So when my sisters and I get home, my dad's in the driveway, and he's just, "I don't know what to do. I've been calling social workers. Nobody will come. I don't know. She's driving me crazy." And I said, "Tomorrow, I'm going to call whoever I need to call until I find someone, and we're going to get Mom committed." And I said, "I don't know how it's going to happen, but we have had it. We've been dealing with Mom for 30 plus years." So the next day is when I became aware, not just as someone growing up in a house where mental illness is an issue, but learning how mental health policy is so messed up in this country, what you have to do to get help for someone. I called every hospital, gerontology centers, social workers, and police. I even called Inglewood Police, and I said, "Why didn't you guys take my mom when you were here yesterday?" Everyone said the same thing. Unless your mom is a threat to herself or someone, no one's going to be able to intervene. So I just kept calling, and I finally, towards the end of the day, I found this facility. And this particular hospital said they had a nurse who was on call and that they could get him to come out to the house and he would do an evaluation. And my sister and I said, Jennifer, I think we've got somebody who can come by. And I remember we crossed our fingers. We were just like, please let my mom go off so this guy can do something. And luckily, when the guy came to the house and started questioning my mom, and then when my sister showed up, my mom knew something was up, and she went off into one of her episodes and started screaming and going off and cursing out my sister. So the nurse said, yeah, it's time. And he called an ambulance. And while this was going on, I was on my way to my mom's house. And by the time I got there, they had my mom in the ambulance. And it was really, really sad because I remember she was praying and she was pleading with me, and she saw me and she says, can I please talk to you, Mel? And I just said, Mom, we don't know how to help you anymore. And you need to go with these people so we can find out what's wrong. And I remember feeling really sorry for her, but I was just so tired after so many years. We were just all so worn out. It was like, close the doors and take her. So, they put you on a 3-day hold when it's involuntarily, because we did have to sign the papers to have her involuntarily committed. And those 3 days I had friends calling saying, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing okay. And on the 3rd day, my sisters and I went to visit. And I remember being scared to death because I said, oh my God, we're going to go in her room and she's going to know that I'm the one who called to have that nurse come out. She's going to cuss me out and throw something at my head, And I remember when we went into her hospital room, and it was just so surreal being on a psych ward, bars on the window, which was ironic because my mom always had bars on the window at home. But people were moaning, and you could see there were people who were really, really severe, and it just seemed like my mom didn't belong there, and yet she did. And so we walked in, and my mom was sitting on the bed, and when she turned around, she said, hi, girls. It was me and my sisters, and I was like, what'd you guys do with my mother? Who is this nice woman? And they had gotten my mother's mood stabilized. They had her on antidepressant, antipsychotic. They had her on mood stabilizers. And she was reminiscent to the mother who I remembered from years and years and years ago. And I was just like in shock. So the nurses came in to talk to us, and I looked at my mom's paperwork, and I saw where they had written dementia, and underneath that they had written schizoaffective disorder. And I was looking at this word saying, So I started asking around, and I said, what is this? And, I got home and I Googled it. And when I started reading what schizoaffective disorder was, I said, oh my God, I think this is what my mother's had her whole life. And it was like puzzle pieces coming together. And I'm like, oh my gosh, her keeping everything locked up and all the paranoia and the delusions and the mood swings. That's what this is, So I started calling her doctors and saying, is it possible that my mother suffered from this disorder most of her life? And they were like, only you can make that determination because your mother's gone most of her life undiagnosed and untreated. So it's a guess, but I'm pretty certain that that's exactly what she had. So they did allow my mother to be released after about 10 days, and we got my mom home. And for the past 4 years, she's been medicated, and the dementia is still progressing, but it's just amazing how the medications have really calmed her down, and how now my sisters and I are starting to look back and think on certain behaviors. And now, instead of feeling like it was hatred that my mom had, instead we've got this disorder, this disease, to say, hey, this described what she was. And for me, it's been difficult because I used to think it was easier to believe that she hated me rather than to believe that there was actually some disease that caused her to be the way she was. But over the past 4 years, I've had to reassess how I feel towards my mom, because I have to separate her from this disease and rethink my experiences now from the from the angle of, hey, this was a disease and not necessarily your mother being hateful.